Hello, and welcome to an informal chat with my Brazilian, Portuguese, Angolan, South African, British Jewish friend Morgan about mental health, the supernatural, apologetics, Christianity, the Angolan Civil War, and life, just to name a few topics that we potentially might be encountering. My friend's a content creator with the program Some Christian Guy. You can find them on several platforms, including Facebook and YouTube. We got the Facebook link in the description /Rex Adonai Mega. You can also find them on YouTube at the link that's included. Guys, if you're watching this and there's any sound issues, let me know because I'm illiterate with OBS, but I think I've got it working. So yeah, now we're gonna bring on Morgan with Some Christian Guy. Morgan, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good, yeah, and we're impressed with your background. You were describing it's a heavy wood divider with some bells on it. What's going on with the background there?
Oh, it's just a room divider made out of solid wood. I'm not entirely sure what the material is. I can't remember for the life of me. I think it's pine, but yeah, I bought it because I decided I needed a better background for my videos, and it actually worked out really well because it kind of looks like like an Orthodox church sort of type of thing. I quite like it, and it's really beautiful. It's got these little bells. So if I've got the windows open and I get a breeze, I get these like little Indian chime sort of wind chime effect to it. It's really awesome.
That's cool. Well, thanks for coming on. You're this is actually the first time we've interacted in person. We've had some digital interaction. This is the first time kind of in real time. So I just want to kind of bring you up to speed on how I got introduced to your work. I had a faith conversion in May and wanted just some better content. We were both members of a Facebook group called Adventist Defense League, where I saw some of your posts, liked a lot of your answers, and found your Facebook page that we have described. So I began watching a lot of your videos. I started running, started working out, and your videos are kind of long. They're like about an hour long. So it's great stuff to run to because I don't have to constantly, it's a 7-minute video, go to the next one. It's an hour long, so I can go on a good workout and really listen. And one of the videos that I watched was the video entitled My Story, where you're giving your story. And there were a lot of interesting things about that I think that this audience is going to be interested in. So if you're watching this and you want to learn more about Some Christian Guy, I highly recommend all these videos, but specifically the video My Story. I think you're going to find a lot of things interesting in that. So what I want to do is kind of talk about that video and the things you talked about. The last thing I'll say is that this was a really hard interview to prepare for, because I feel like I could talk to you about psychology for an hour, your background for an hour, Christianity apologetics for an hour. Like there's so much going on, but we're going to try to cram everything together in one interview in a coherent fashion. So, in your video, you describe your background, which is eclectic, to maybe summarize it. So can you tell us, if possible, how you would answer the question, where you're from?
In the simplest way, or most direct way, would be that I am Brazilian specifically. I was born in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And when I was about a year old, my parents moved to South Africa. This was back in probably 1985, around about 1984, 1985. I was born in 83. And the reason they ended up in South Africa is because my father always wanted to go back to Africa, which implies he used to be in Africa prior to that. And that's where the Angolan connection actually is. My father is actually from Angola. He was born in Angola. And when the Civil War issue started up there, then when he was young, he moved to Brazil. And that's where he met my mother, being that the Angolan language, the official language there, being Portuguese, because it used to be a colony. Obviously made Brazil one of the better choices. They could have gone to Portugal, but Portugal had its own issues. It had not long since come out of the oppression of the dictator Salazar, so it had all of its own issues. So that's one of the reasons why my old man went over to Brazil, and that's where he met my mother there. And so that's the most direct answer is where I'm from. But from your description, I see that you include a lot of my other sort of ethnic backgrounds and stuff like that, all of the other mixtures that occur further back. Yeah.
Well, I like, I'm watching the video and you're giving your background. You're like, well, it began in 1870 with the Sephardic Jews who have, you get a very good understanding of your background. That was kind of interesting. Most people,
Yeah.
yeah. Let me
Well,
talk about this because I think this is a topic that not a lot of people know about, or they might be afraid to ask questions about because it's kind of risque. But some of the revolutions that happened in Africa with apartheid, you talked a little bit about in the video, with the Angolan Civil War. Let's start with the Angolan Civil War because I feel like people, that's probably something that most Americans probably don't even know there is an Angola, let alone an Angolan Civil War. So what was the Angolan Civil War? What happened? What's your take on that? Having a father who experienced it, what was that all about?
Yeah. Now, what happens is you are actually going way beyond what I understand of those times. Anyone,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, the Angolan War was before, was sort of a bit before my time and things like that. Um, I'm not old enough to have been present. I mean, it happened when my father was still young, sort of thing. But obviously, as one can imagine, that caused an enormous upheaval, obviously in one person, in a person's life. Essentially, they went to Brazil as refugees,
Right.
and it was part of a lot of instability and unrest that happened in Africa in general in those days, whether it was Idi Amin or whoever it was. Basically, got to a point where they're like, right, anyone who isn't black, African, or from some tribe, it didn't matter whether you were Indian or Chinese or European, it didn't matter what, you basically you're gone, and you essentially left the country with the clothes on your back, and that was it, sort of thing. So it's I don't know if I think maybe refugee is maybe a bit of a strong word, but it probably does apply to what my father's family essentially sort of, their situation, sort of thing. And then my father ended up in Brazil as a young man, I think still in his teens, if I'm not mistaken. And then the rest of his family sort of came afterwards. His dad, once he wrapped up business there and things like that. So they basically had to start all over again in Brazil. Going on to apartheid's it's a complex issue, as I'm sure you can imagine. I mean, a lot of people don't really understand what it was about. There's a lot more nonsense than there is truth about what apartheid was like. I mean, it was horrible. I mean, let's make no mistake about it. But a lot of the nuances and things like that, a lot of people don't realize. I mean, there was a lot of foreign interests. Russia and the communists were involved. The CIA was involved. These things are always much bigger than what people think.
Right.
As just a small little race issue going on there. There's much bigger globalist things going on there and stuff like that. But living as a person of mixed race there was interesting. I find myself in one of those peculiar places where if you're mixed, in today's imbecility of racial everything, you're not white enough or black enough or anything enough to really belong anywhere, and you kind of get the short end of the stick from no matter where you go, kind of thing. So I mean, we didn't obviously get the worst of all the treatment, really, but you sort of, as a foreigner, you're treated with sort of like a mild neglect. It's like you're not dark enough for us to blatantly abuse you, but we'll just treat you with a mild neglect, as if you're stupid, and like the retarded younger child kind of thing, So and obviously parents having heavy accents and stuff like that, sort of thing, and one of the problems is the Afrikaner in culture in those days is a lot of machismo, right? Now machismo is typically a Latino word, but I imagine you guys in the US, you understand what the word machismo means, right? And the Afrikaner has quite a machismo thing as well. And the problem is with this machismo, because my mother's a very attractive woman, and obviously being Brazilian, quite exotic. So the woman, the Afrikaner woman, used to really, really treat her badly because their husbands were all drooling over her, kind of thing. So it was a lot of awkwardness and a lot of it was very strange. But fortunately, all of that got eventually sorted out. In '94, we did flee. In '94, when Nelson Mandela was coming out. So things eventually got to the point where they're like, right, we need to end this apartheid system and stuff like that, which is all good and well. But there was a lot of talk, specifically from the more radical elements in society, where like, oh yeah, we're going to now go and kill the whites. We're going to finish them off. And obviously, we weren't white enough for the Afrikaners to treat us well, but also we're not black enough for the blacks to treat us well either, right? So because they don't discriminate, as long as you are fairer than a certain color, you're done. That's it. Sort of thing. So my parents sort of seeing the writing on the wall, they're like, you know what, my father having experienced what he experienced from Angola, he's like, we need to leave, right? We need to go. So we actually ended up in Portugal. We ended up moving to Portugal, lived there for a while. Things didn't really settle, didn't really come right. And then we moved back to Brazil. Things didn't really settle, I missed a whole year of school, sort of thing as well. And then eventually, after about a year or so of messing, my father actually left us in Portugal for a while and moved to the US to try and find work. And for whatever reason, things didn't pan out and stuff like that. And then after everything was said and done, we eventually ended up back in South Africa, because all of the basically the race war that everyone was talking about didn't manifest, fortunately. Everything seemed to transition quite well, and it seems that the whole truth and reconciliation, I don't know if is this something you're familiar with, though, the truth and reconciliation sort of
not really, no.
So basically what happens is, in order to try and ameliorate all of the racial tensions and stuff like that between everyone, there was something called a truth and reconciliation sort of committee or set up, put together by the government, where all of the major players could actually make peace. All of the white political parties and the black political parties, and everyone could sort of make peace with each other, so that this didn't descend into a chaos of like a major civil war, where now people are just slaughtering each other left, right, and center, like what you basically in many ways gotten in other African countries. So that transition of power was actually occurred very, very well. It actually worked out really, really well for everyone. And then and one of the good things as well is, because there was such a large number, and this is something that people always forget, there was such a massive a number of whites who for the longest time had no love for the apartheid system at all, and really worked to try and get rid of all of that. That the how can you say, the black community was like, we need to acknowledge these people and what they did for us, because they got into trouble, they got arrested, they got beaten as well, trying to fight for our freedoms and stuff like that. And you get people like the famous, are you familiar with Johnny Clegg?
No.
So he was one of the most famous sort of white African folk sort of musicians, sort of thing. And for a long time he was if you listen to his music, it's actually pretty good stuff. He sung against the apartheid area and all these kinds of, and there were a lot of other people that got involved and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, the whole transition was really, really good. And then when we came back to South Africa, we found that things were stable, things were okay, things were, nothing untoward transpired. And because of the similarity between the Brazilian culture and the African culture in general, I found that for the most part, whilst I couldn't relate at all to the Europeans, the Afrikaners, the British and stuff like that, because even the Afrikaners, they come from the Dutch, right? So I just, but it's just a cultural thing. You just don't gel, right? And I was actually a little bit of a strange phenomena, because I was always hanging out with these black kids and stuff like that, because the culture was the same. Because what a lot of people don't realize is the Brazilian culture is for the most part, even though it was Portugal that colonized Brazil, essentially, I mean, one thing that Americans love to bitch and moan about all the time is slavery this and slavery that, yeah, about how all these slaves and came to Brazil to North America, and well, woe is me, right? With all the social justice and the racial politics. But in Brazil, right, you guys had maybe 400,000 slaves perhaps over the course of your trade, of the slave trade. Brazil had 4 million.
Wow.
Brazil had 4 million slaves taken to South America. So the population of Africans, West Africans specifically, is massive, sort of thing. And so Brazil, if you look at Brazilians nowadays, we're sort of like an in-between color people with like and there's a lot of mixture. It's like there's no everyone has got African heritage somewhere along the line, sort of thing. So it's a completely different situation there. But essentially 4 million people, and
Wow.
and there was such a massive a number of Africans there. In fact, till this very day, the largest number of Africans, with the largest number of Africans, or should we say Black people, in the world is in Brazil, with the exception only of Nigeria.
Wow.
Sort of thing. So that's how big the population is.
In there, because you're talking, you're all over the place with background. No, you're good. No, in terms of you mentioned that something I was just about to ask you about, identity politics. You brought that concept up. So you've got sort of a unique perspective, whereas if someone is a white person or a quote unquote Black person, we may be easier to polarize. Whereas if you don't have that background, you find that it's helpful for you to step back and analyze things less emotionally because you have such a diverse background. How do you interact with this age of identity politics where people basically define their politics based on their genetic composition? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely despise everything that Americans have done the world no favors whatsoever. No, honestly, and I'm not trying to come down on Americans and stuff like that. I mean, Americans have done a lot of good things for the world as well, sort of thing, you know. But man, when it comes to this racial stuff, you Americans have done the rest of the world no favors whatsoever. It's absolutely horrible. You guys are basically using racism and bigotry to fight racism and bigotry.
Right.
It's like if I wish Americans had learned. The Americans should take lessons from what happened in South Africa in the whole truth and reconciliation thing, rather than what this social justice politics stuff that is going on. It's absolutely horrible, because it's one of the funniest things growing up, even in apartheid South Africa and afterwards, right? If I think about myself at school in South Africa, this even though myself personally, I always resonated with Black people more because of the culture. They're a lot more talkative. They speak a bit louder and all this kind of stuff. I always relate because Brazilians are basically the same, right? That African culture, a lot of the spiritualism that you get in Brazil. There's a spiritualist movement or religion in Brazil. It's called Macumba, right? The word Macumba actually comes from an African word, if I'm not mistaken, that's pronounced Macum, if I'm getting it correct. And Macum refers to the skin of an animal which you put over a drum that you beat in religious ceremonies. That's basically that language has transitioned. You know, our capoeira, our dance fighting, martial art kind of thing, that all comes from there, sort of thing. So Brazilian culture is, you would think that having been colonized by Europeans, that it would feel European, but outside of the old architecture, the culture is basically African in every way. Our samba, our tastes, our musical taste, everything is essentially African. So when growing up as this ostensible, I mean, if you look at me, I look like a white guy, right? Sort of thing. More so now that I'm living in the UK where the sun never shines. So, you know, I used to be able to get a really decent tan in South Africa. In fact, I used to go a shade of red because some of my ancestors are Indian, of the native Indians from.
I left something out. I apologize.
Yeah, that's fine. You know, we're talking about a lot of stuff. So if you had to look at myself, my brother, and my sister and see what the color that each of us go when we're tan, we each go completely different colors, sort of thing. So my brother, he goes like a bronze color, like a Greek god, like a Greek deity. He goes like a bronze color. My sister goes like an olive brown very much like a European, and I go like a reddish color, like the people, like an Amazonian kind of thing. Got like a reddish brown to me, sort of thing. It was always very, very interesting. Anyway, so when I look at this a whole social justice thing, growing up in school, there was never question about this race business sort of thing. You just laughed at stuff, and we would laugh even at each other. We would laugh at each other's cultures. We would laugh and tease each other for our peculiarities and stuff like that. It was just, there was none of this kind of thing that you see, that is coming into the world now, where we're supposed to hate each other and we're supposed to be suspicious of each other and all that kind of stuff. There was none of this at all. We just got along, kind of thing. I mean, they used to call me coconut, I think it was, inside out. Yeah, my friends, they used to say I was an inside out coconut, right? Well, black on the inside, white on the outside. But this, they didn't mean anything by it. It was not right. Like today. It was today. That's a negative thing, right? To be called like that. It's like you're a traitor to your race or something like that, right. Sort of thing. Now, there were a couple of white kids that did look at me funny. Let's make no mistake, right? I mean, this kind of thing happens. But for the most part, there was none of this kind of discomfort. You felt no discomfort around people of other races. Whereas today you do. Today you do. Today, there is this, and I feel it as something I never experienced before, having grown up in such a truly multicultural place like South Africa. It's got like 11 official languages, right? And it's about as multicultural as it gets, right? And never experience, even in a place where there was this in recent history. Not like Americans, where it was like 200 years ago, where you guys haven't had slavery or anything like that for ages, right? But South Africa, it finished recently. 1994 was just the other day. Yeah. Right. Never felt this discomfort around people of other races. This like you have to watch your words, otherwise someone's going to misunderstand or someone's going to take it wrong or whatever. There's just such a freedom that to just really appreciate each other for whatever they are. Yeah. Right. You don't. I moved to the UK, and whenever I talk to Americans and stuff, this doesn't exist anywhere else in the UK, in traditionally Western countries. So UK, America, and places like that. There's this constant racial undertone all the time because of because of this stupid social justice imbecility. It's completely ridiculous, and people don't even take the time anymore to sort of look. I mean, just yesterday or the day before, I'm not going to obviously name him, but this group that you're mentioning, with Adventist Defense League sort of thing. There was a guy that basically said a phrase. I'm not going to repeat it, but said a phrase which basically was like, "Shut up, you angry white man." Essentially, was what the phrase means, right? I've tuned into the social justice lingo, sort of thing, and I'm like, dude, I'm mixed race. It's and even if I wasn't, how can you say such a thing, right? Yeah. An Adventist guy who is high up in the Atlantic Union, right? Who's doing videos and presentations on YouTube on behalf of he's a leader. Yeah. Right? I'm like, mate, are you crazy? That you're doing this? Because I took him to task about something about social justice, because they were doing the Atlantic Conference had done this presentation and brought this ethics woman on to talk about ethics, and she didn't talk about ethics. She said nothing in the whole time that she had. She said nothing meaningful at all, nothing but the usual sloganism and truism that you can see. She learned this in some social justice studies at university, right?
Well, and later on in the interview too, because you talked a lot about your experiences with the church, and you were very honest. You're very open about, there's the principle of embarrassment used to verify if someone's lying. Yes. And you are very brutally honest in that video, My Story, and you were very honest about your interaction with the church and maybe some negative interactions you had. And I do want to get to that. I want to transition just for the sake of time. But like
Absolutely.
I told you, we could just talk about this all day. You've got so many
Yeah,
things
for
I want
sure.
to talk to you about.
Yeah.
In the video, you said something very interesting that I think my audience is going to love. And feel free to maybe pull back if it's a little too personal. You kind of talked about how it was a little personal in the video.
Sure.
But you said that in Brazil, in that video, My Story, there was an incident where your sister was pulled out of her bed by some sort of force. Are you open to talking about that? Because you talked about it and then left, and then I was like, I want to hear more. What the heck was going on with that thing? You know what I mean? So, so I was, what happened? So can you take me back? Give the audience as much detail about what happened. So yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So this didn't actually take place in Brazil. This took place in South Africa.
Okay.
Of my 3 siblings, I'm actually the only one that was born in Brazil. The other 2 were actually born in South Africa. They hate this fact, but unfortunately, that is what it is. So what happens is my mother's background, right? If we take not my father's, so my father's lineage is European, sort of Catholic and Jewish, right? Mm-hmm. The surname Lopez is a Jewish surname, right? Mm-hmm. Comes from the Latin for wolf. There's a sort of rule of thumb that if the surname refers to a plant or an animal, chances are it's a Jewish in origin. If as far as European Jews are concerned. It's very interesting, specifically Jews from the Iberian Peninsula, which means Portugal and Spain. Anyhow, I digress. Sorry, I've got attention deficit disorder, severe attention deficit disorder, made worse by the chemotherapy that I take. So please bear with me. Feel free to interject and say, Morgan, you digress, and keep me on. So in my mother's lineage, there was basically rank spiritualism, sort of thing. So, like her grandparents and her uncles and aunts. So, for example, one of the things that you get if you ever visit Brazil, you will see sort of under lampposts or in certain corners in a person's garden or whatever, there's almost like little kind of shrine type of things, like a little house, little kind of almost like imagine like a little bird house or something like that, sort of in the corner where you go and you leave food offerings or you leave what offerings for the spirits, basically. Sort of thing. And my mother used to be very sickly. So my mother's family comes from extreme poverty, but rank poverty, right? The kind of poverty that only third world people know about, right? Sort of thing. Not even poor people in first world countries know what this kind of poverty is like, sort of thing. And so, if she used to get very sick a lot and all these kinds of things, and she used to get taken sort of like the traditional healer to do some little funny things over her, and off you go, right? Now you're healed and all that kind of stuff. So there was rank spiritualism, and her family, as in her immediate family, eventually came away from that and became Seventh-day Adventists when she was she was still a young girl, maybe 10 years old, maybe slightly earlier, sort of thing. And they eventually became Christians and sort of started along that journey. But that is the background. And what a lot of people don't realize is that if your transition from one thing to another is not clean cut, if you don't cut it there properly, right? If there's any kind of syncretism, those things stay with you. They come with you, right? And even though my father's family had never been spiritualists or anything, they were so my father was also Seventh-day Adventist. Catholics eventually became Seventh-day Adventists and stuff like that, right? That spiritual almost like hold on the family lineage in a way, right? That you'll find that people that are involved in that kind of spirit world are very into this whole bloodline kind of business, yeah, sort of thing. It kind of stays. And so what eventually transpired then is that my family was essentially haunted when we were living in South Africa. So things like my sister used to get pulled out of bed by an invisible force, essentially. She used to get pulled out of bed. Yeah, you'd see things moving around the house in the dark and stuff like that. You know, at one point, it's in the beginning, people dismiss it. Oh, you know, it's a kid, it's over imagination. So I was probably around 10, 11 years old at this time. My sister was, you know, maybe, so my sister is, I think, what, 5 years younger than me. So she would have been about 5 years old, shall we say. I was 10 years, 11 years old, sort of thing. So yeah, so that kind of thing, we saw things move and shadows and you know, those kinds of things that just is not always, it's not always as aggressive as being pulled out of bed. More often than not, people, and this is another thing that a lot of people don't realize, the most vulnerable person in your family is usually the youngest, and is usually the one who's going to get the worst brunt. Or if there's any kind of demonic thing going on, they're usually going to get it the worst, sort of thing. So it was invariably my sister, but we all had strange experiences and stuff like that. And then we eventually got a pastor to come in and say and pray. It was good friends with the family, pray, bless the family, and do all kinds of things, and to eventually have almost like an exorcism sort of thing. I mean, Seventh-day Adventists don't really do exorcisms in the way people usually think about when they think about, you know, movies and the Catholic Church. But, you know, you do the praying, you do all these kinds of things to and get that influence out. And things eventually things in that sense got better.
Yeah.
From that point on.
Well, when you're talking to your sister about this, obviously, I'm sure it came up. Did she describe how it felt? Was it a burning? What did it feel like to be grabbed by a ghost and dragged in bed? Everyone's dying to know that.
Yeah, I have no idea, and the reason for this is because, and now I'm not entirely sure that I'm at liberty to discuss anything in particular detail because it involves other people. But my sister doesn't remember a lot of things about her past.
Okay.
She's very, very fair. There's reasons for that, right? Because there was a lot of family difficulties and things like that. And one of the things that my sister, so whilst I developed sociopathy, my sister doesn't remember stuff, sort of thing. So she knows these things. She knows these things have happened mostly because we've told we've like, do you remember, and all that kind of stuff. And we were there, and we saw these things happening. But in terms of a vivid recollection or of anything of that sort, it's just not there for her. So I have no idea.
No worries. And you know, this is another thing that I think the audience is going to be interested in. But you mentioned in your video that there may be trepidation. In that video, My Story, like we mentioned before, you had a no-holds-barred, brutally honest description of yourself. You even openly say, just like you did now, you know, I struggle with sociopathy, narcissism, things of this nature. And it was a Christian video, but you were very critical of your experiences in the church. So there was no, from what I could tell, attempt to polish anything over. You get to this moment, though, where you're talking about this experience with someone that you met who was apparently a victim of the ritualized satanic abuse. And you got to that point, and you even said, I can't even go into this. I'm not even going to move. You know, the video will no longer be PG. So, of course, then your mind, as the viewer, your mind begins to be like, wow, you know, what happened? So I like you said in the video, you may not be comfortable explaining what happened, but what is your understanding of, moving on from like New Age or demonic, of Satanism? Is that something that actually happens? Is that, you know, a problem? And maybe one last thing to preface it, this audience tends to be 50-50, where after the Epstein thing, you know, we did a lot of investigation into Epstein, into, you know, the Pizzagate scandal. So that's all we talked about for like a year and a half was like Satanism. That's all we talked about. And half the audience is like, everyone is a Satanist or mailman is working for an underground group trying to kidnap children. The other side is saying, this is a troll, you're being played. So they're very 50-50. What's your understanding of that word Satanism? Is it an issue? Is it something to be aware of? What are your thoughts on all that?
Man, that's quite loaded. So essentially, until the Epstein issue, right? Everyone completely poo-pooed the idea that there was organized pedophile rings at the highest level of society. People denied this. They're like, it's not true. And then along comes someone like Epstein. Oh, by the way, it's true. And the simple fact of the matter is, if I can refer to social justice back again,
Sure.
the people constantly bitching about social justice and slavery. One thing they don't realize is there are more slaves today than there ever was in the past. People just don't know about it, right? And because all of the social justice, because it's a farce, it's a political farce. Actual slavery never gets, real, genuine slavery that happens still today doesn't get talked about, doesn't get dealt with. End of story, right? Sexual slavery is a problem, massive problem. And the people who perpetrate these things, the blood could be your neighbor, you would never know.
Wow.
You would simply never know, right? And I got to know about this world through someone very close to me, right? Where the father was involved in these things. The grandfather was involved in these things, the grandmother, and the amount of abuse that this individual endured was extraordinary. I cannot even begin. It would be inappropriate for Facebook, in fact,
right.
For me to tell even some of the most mild stories, and it was exactly the kind of thing that you would expect. The mother, like for example, people for the longest time, people were saying, "Oh, there's no such thing as witches." Right, until the witch coven here in the UK, the Society of Witches, whatever it is, have now insisted that the Scottish government pardoned the witches in the past. So there is such thing as witches. There is such thing as, but the grandmother was a high level witch. She was in a coven. The grandfather is a Freemason. Part of that world. The father was actually just an abusive son of a cross-eyed camel. Right. He was just abusive. He also had severe mental problems, which is one of the reasons why he was so abusive and stuff like that. And because she had no protection from the family unit, then the family that was practicing these rituals and all that kind of stuff basically had free access to her. And all of that kind of stuff. So this kind of thing goes on. It just goes on all the time. The rape, the mutilation of young children, the idea of children being kept in cages, being sold off to men. She used to be sold off as well. So her father used to chain her to the bed and used to sell her basically to whoever wanted. And this kind of thing goes on all the time, and you would never know. Right, and because one of the things that people don't realize is that if you had to meet this girl's father on the street, he would be the nicest guy you've ever met.
Wow.
You would not know that this guy was a raging pedophile.
Well, here's something about that, because I was on a different program with a friend of mine. We were investigating all these things, and these things were coming to light. The Finders cult here in the United States, things of that nature. And my friend, who was on the program with me, he was not a Christian, not a believer, but when he would say that when we were recording episodes and we were getting into the Finder, into all these things, that he knew in a very intuitive sense that what he was talking about was pure evil. And he even said that he would say in the recordings, "I feel like someone's watching me in the room." He's getting kind of freaked out because the stuff is real. Like, we were looking at CIA documents of involvement with the Finders. And he said something I kind of want to toss your way to see how you play with it. He said, knowing something like this that is so purely evil, for it to have that type of being, there must be a contrast. There must be something that's good. And that's what he was saying. And he's not agree with. What do you think of that idea? That there must be something good to counterbalance that?
Right. Philosophically, I even though that preaches well,
sure.
Philosophically, I cannot agree, because to say that this is evil presupposes a moral absolute, right? And so, if you presuppose a moral absolute in order to make an argument for good and evil, you are basically presupposing the very thing in question. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't really work. It's like, if in the absence of God, if there is no God, then this is just the kind of thing that happens. We're just
Right.
animals. We're just animals that in some cases we help each other, and in other cases we kill each other. That's it.
Right.
And we can't even say murder, because murder implies a moral judgment, right?
Right.
So the fact that what I would urge the individual, right, is to and any individual that is undecided about whether there is a God or not, is like the fact that you have this extraordinarily strong intuition within you that some things are unequivocally evil, right? Without the need for argument, without the need for the debate, this is evil, finished, right? It means there's a moral absolute. And if there is a moral absolute, where does it come from? Because you will not find that in the laws of nature. It doesn't exist.
And
where does that come from?
Let me piggyback off of that, because that's going to set up. Now we're going to transition more into your thoughts about. And I haven't even gotten into the New Age stuff. I have to leave some. We just don't have enough time. But there's a lot of other interesting things that I want to talk about. But I'm going to transition.
If you're okay with it, I've got the time. I don't mind.
Okay, sure, fair. There were some interesting things, and we might touch on it in a little bit later, or maybe if you'd be willing, we can come back and do a part 2, because there's a lot of I could talk to you about. But you do a lot of recording about mental health. Yes. And I feel like this is a good segue into that. So you're very open. I read a book, Narcissism Revisited by Sam Valenkin, I think it was called.
Oh, Professor Zamva. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah. And I read it. Well, it was great, but it was shocking, because I felt like, how did this guy know everything about me? You know what I mean? Like, I was reading my mind. I was like, what in the world? It was there. And you seem like you've done that work where you've become aware of these things, and instead of just avoiding the mirror, you really looked at the mirror and said, this is what's there, and have attempted to work with that. You said a quote, I'm paraphrasing, but in the video, my story, you talked about how the Bible says that your life may get so bad that it was better if you didn't live, that if you were never born. So that's a warning. Do the work. Don't be that change. Don't be that type of person. And it seems like you're open enough about your issues and trying to work through them. Let's talk a little bit about maybe not narcissism specifically, but maybe more psychopathy. So if someone is a narcissist, or if someone is a psychopath in the sense that they have no moral ability, or they have no emotional capability, remorse is an impossibility for them. How does that impact them spiritually? Is it then impossible for them to come to a place of repentance, impossible for them to try to seek forgiveness for their sins? Does the Holy Spirit have the ability to penetrate even that mental disorder? What are your thoughts about that in terms of absolute psychopathy, where you don't have any remorse, no human connection? How does that relate to spirituality? Can a narcissist actually have hope?
Yeah. What you're asking is a profoundly difficult question, because a lot of people don't realize how profound genuine narcissism and genuine psychopathy actually is, how profound. And here's the thing, it's not actually, how can I say, these things are technically not mental disorders in the way like a schizophrenia. These things are actually post-traumatic disorders. Technically speaking, the reason these people become that way is because they suffer horrendous abuse as children, and narcissism in its essence is an adaptive protective heuristic. It's a self-defense heuristic, which then the person or as a child develops in order to be able to survive in that environment, sort of thing. So narcissism and psychopathy is actually a coping mechanism in order for you as a child to be able to cope living in an unstable, abusive environment. The only problem is that because that happens at a child's developmental age, that they develop that and then they stay that way for the rest of their lives. So in the same way that the way for a soldier to behave on the battlefield is appropriate to the battlefield, but it's not appropriate to civilian life. And it's the same way. Narcissism and psychopathy is actually very, very appropriate if you want to survive in a degenerate, volatile household situation. It's actually it has utilitarian value. But it's inappropriate. But once you become a full functioning adult member of society, it's now inappropriate, because and then the things that you should have developed in order to interact with other people don't develop. So narcissists and psychopaths and things like that, specifically the narcissist, a lot of people think they're dealing with an adult, but you're not actually dealing with that adult. You are quite literally dealing with someone who is stuck between the ages of like 3 and 9 years old. Right. You are in no way, in the very literal sense of the word, you are not dealing with an adult. You're dealing with a child. So this is quite difficult, right? Now, one of the things that can give a person hope, yes, there is hope for these people. There is absolutely, it's hard as hell. Like you cannot even imagine how difficult it is. But obviously for God, nothing is impossible. So one of the primary examples is, are you familiar with a chap called David Wood?
What's the name again?
David Wood.
No.
So there is a gentleman called David Wood. He runs the ministry called Acts 17 Apologetics. He specifically targets Christian-Muslim dialogue, right? He's probably one of the best in the world, actually, at the moment. You really should look up his channel. He specifically evangelizes the Muslim world, and he's very, very successful. However, he is a psychopath. He is full on psychopath. So he actually ended up in prison because he attempted to murder his father by putting a hammer through his skull. Essentially, he is a clinic. So he's been diagnosed. He is a psychopath. No emotional salience whatsoever, sort of thing. So, for example, not long ago, his brother died of drug related issues, and he was very, very public. You can go to his channel and you can see it's all there. So I'm not divulging anything that's private. He's made it all very public, and you can see when he's talking about it that intellectually he understands. You know, there's two parts of a person. You can understand something intellectually, and you can and then you can have, with that, you can have, there's an emotional connection to the thing, right? Psychopaths and stuff like that, they have something that's called a cold empathy, right? They can look at you and they can understand you are feeling sad, you are feeling happy, you are feeling whatever, but there's no emotional correspondence going on here, right? It's when he looks at you and sees you are sad, for him, it's like looking at the wall and saying the wall is white. That's literally what it's like for him. There's no, so for a normal person, you would look at someone, you are sad, and then you would feel there would be some emotionally salient thing going on, where you would then empathize with the person and feel, well, then maybe try to comfort them. Whereas for the psychopath, it's like, this person is sad. It's a statement of fact. There's nothing else to it. And then he carries on with his life. That's it, right? So it's quite interesting. So the thing is, and this is where people have a misunderstanding about Christianity, right? Especially when it comes to love and things like that. Love is not this, especially nowadays, right? We've got all this hate speech, this, and love is love, that, and all that kind of nonsense. People have completely misunderstood what love actually is, and I've got videos about what love actually is, so clinically, psychologically, and everything like that as well. But for the most part, love is actually something that you believe about yourself and the world and others, and it's what you do, right? It's what you do. You can have all the mushy feelings and all that garbage as much as you like, but if it doesn't translate into something meaningful in life, some actual product in the real world in terms of actions and way of life and stuff like that, then your feelings are meaningless. They're useless. I mean, what's the point of them? They do nothing, right? And this is something that the Christian world has lost sight of. So even if there is no emotional correlate, and here's the interesting thing, it's not true that narcissists and psychopaths and people like that don't feel anything. What they do feel is almost exclusively negative emotions. They don't have access to happy, good emotions. And it's actually a miserable existence. It's not nice at all. So they do have emotions. It's just only negative emotions. They're constantly, it's this constant weight in the soul, almost, sort of thing. There's no access to positive emotions. It's only negative emotions. But nevertheless, the person in their mind, in the actual. So here's if I can make a reference. The Bible talks about the mark of the beast, right? The mark of the beast goes where? It goes on the hand and on the forehead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means that, and then corresponding to that, you've got the seal of God, and the seal of God has, so the mark of the beast has to do with thinking and behaving in accordance to the will of the Antichrist power, and having the seal and the mark of God means that you act according to God's dictates and
Mm-hmm.
commandments, and the principle of love and all of these kinds of things. So it's all about how you behave, right? And so when the mark goes on the forehead and on the hand, it means that you think accordingly. That means you believe, you accept whatever propositions are on the table for you to accept, and then you act accordingly, which is why then the mark is on the hand and on the forehead. You do not see the Bible say anything about the mark going into the heart. It would be nice, yes, that there's an emotional dimension to it, but it's not necessary, right? It's not necessary for this to be an emotional thing. And this is the problem why you see, specifically in the charismatic movement today, where people are seeking experience because they want to feel something, right? Because especially the American culture, again, this is why most of this nonsense is out in the US. Everyone thinks that unless I'm having some sort of emotionally incontinent experience, that my experience is then not genuine or not valid. Unless I've got these gushing emotions about everything, unless I'm jumping up and down and all that kind of stuff, sort of thing. Like when you see girls meet each other and they go, and they're jumping up and down, and it's like, a lot of the time people feel that they need to put on this display and have an emotional correlate, because if that's absent, then it means that the experience is not authentic, it's not true. It's rubbish. That's what the advertising and the culture bound thing has
Mm-hmm.
made us think love is, but that's not what love is at all. It's not in any sense of the word. So it is possible for narcissists. Easier for the psychopath, by the way, much more difficult for the narcissist, because psychopathy, borderline, histrionic, those personality disorders, once the person gets to a certain age, the disorder itself spontaneously resolves itself, even though the behaviors remain behind. But even for the psychopath, it usually, which is why most serial killers are younger than a certain age. They're usually between the ages of, say, 20 to 35, roughly, right? It's the actually less than 35, maybe even 40. It's the range of the highest degree of criminality in men is when they're young. They mellow out, and the reason for that is because personality changes as you get older. You gradually become, so your personality dimension, agreeableness and conscientiousness, gradually increase as you get older, which is why one of the reasons why they suspect, again, I'm not a psychologist, by the way, guys, I don't have a degree in this, but they suspect that this is one of the reasons why these problems resolve themselves, because as the person gets older and the personality matures, they then become more stable. And so these things self-resolve. This does not happen for the narcissist at all. Narcissism continues until the day they die. You actually cannot, at the moment at least, you can't fix a narcissist. It cannot be fixed. The narcissist can become self-aware, and they can train how to modify their behaviors and modify certain things, right? And also all of the personality disorders have an underpinning of narcissism, by the way, right? So the psychopath has got an element of narcissism. The borderline has got an element of, they all have an element of narcissism, right? In fact, in the world today, narcissism is the guiding principle of culture today, especially in the West. Yeah, it's if you are not a narcissist, you can't get along in the world. As simple as that. That's why the narcissism is increasing. It's because the world has become so hostile, that people are developing narcissism as a coping mechanism. And this is why narcissism is on the increase, specifically in the West, because there's social media and there's all of these pressures on the individual to be a certain way. And so people develop narcissism as a coping mechanism.
If I can, one of the things
yeah.
that in one of your videos that I think was very poignant, you were talking about Christians. I believe you took this principle and brought it to anyone as a whole. But you said in one of your videos on mental health that it's the duty of Christians to be mentally healthy. You said it was a Christian duty. So
yes.
that a lot of people, in my experience, when I look at it, it's like trying to be mentally healthy is like treating yourself. It's like
yes.
you're doing yourself a favor, but you're saying no. It's actually your moral responsibility to strive for mental health. I think that was an interesting take. What did you mean by that? You can maybe kind of elaborate on that.
Well, the reason why it's your moral duty to improve on your mental health is because if you're not mentally healthy, you cannot love. It's that simple. It's literally that simple. You cannot love the way God intended you to if you're not mentally healthy. It's that simple. And one of the most heartbreaking things that you learn in psychology is that if you have enjoyed the first thing to die when you experience trauma is your ability to love properly, is your empathy and your compassion. So contrary to what the world out there is saying, that those who have suffered and those who have this and experienced trauma and this, that they are more compassionate, that they are more understanding, that's actually not true. Psychology has discovered that this is not true. One of the first things to die when you experience trauma in your life is your ability to love properly, is your ability to love not only others, but yourself, which is why today, as narcissism increases, the environment creates trauma. Trauma creates narcissism in the population, and you see the rise of self-harm, drug abuse, alcoholism, the promiscuity. What a lot of people don't understand is that promiscuity is something called self-trashing, right? Going out there and sleeping with 100 men or 100 women and allowing them to gangbang you and all that kind of stuff. That is very typical of people with personality disorders who go, this is a means, so allowing men to gangbang you is the exact equivalent of cutting your wrists.
Right.
You are self-harming, right? And the vast majority of the sex positive movement out there is actually self-harm in disguise. Pretending to be liberation, right? And that's where the narcissism comes in. I will harm myself, but I'm going to pretend I'm doing something virtuous, because the narcissist cannot accept that they're actually broken and they're actually whatever.
Right.
So they try to make out that something bad or harmful is actually this wonderful thing. The vast majority of promiscuity that's going on out there these days is literally self-harm. Is women self-harming, right? Because this is why a lot of people, they're like, well, why do women go out and then get themselves completely smashed drunk and then end up getting raped? Surely they know better, but you're not allowed to say that. But what the psychological world has, the psychological discipline has discovered, the reason these girls are doing this is because they're self-trashing, they're self-abusing, they're abusing themselves, and men are the proxy. They are, so they're substituting, and so a person who cuts their wrists to self-harm, they're substituting a male, the knife for a man, or even men. They're substituting the knife, they're substituting the drugs, they're substituting the alcohol to abuse themselves with other people. And this is why the Bible calls promiscuity. That is actually a profound insight that the Bible has, where it talks about adultery and stuff like that. It is the sin against yourself. And the reason it literally constitutes self-harm. And when you look at all the pathologies and stuff like that, when you see the narcissists, the psychopaths, and the borderlines and stuff like that, a dysfunctional sex life is common to all of them. Yeah,
that's a fascinating take, and I think, especially in this audience is libertarian, it might be a hot take, but I do see a lot of that happening where especially with pornography,
Yes.
where people sort of celebrate it as, well, this is good for you. This is like a
Yes.
health tool, and
Yeah.
when I talk to men, in my experience, maybe you're watching this and you're different. That's fine. Let me know. But in my experience, I've never met a guy who was proud of the fact that he had a constant ritualized addiction to pornographic material. I've never met anyone who was thinking, wow, this is really enriching part of my life. And I see so many people addicted to that. And you mentioned, maybe women with their issues, but there seems to be an attempt, instead of to do the hard work of changing some problems about yourself, just call the problems virtue. And now you haven't had to do any work at all. And all of a sudden you're virtuous all of a sudden. So I think that is something you see.
Yeah. One of the popular misconceptions is that women don't consume pornography as much. They do. Women consume as much, if not more, pornography than men do. The difference is that the primary form of pornography that women consume, even though they consume traditional pornography, the primary form of pornography that women consume is literature. So your Mills and Boons, your love romance stories and stuff like that. If you read those things, you see they're actually very pornographic. And
Right.
the reason for that is because things that excite the imagination is more popular amongst women, whereas things that are plainly visual is more exciting for men, sort of thing. So that's why women drift. Just generally speaking, women read more than men. End of story, right? But if you look at what women are reading, it's novels, it's stuff that allows them to go into their own minds and imagine themselves in the situation, or because that's what appeals to the woman. So I mean, and the men know this instinctively, right? When you're courting a woman, if you want to sleep with a woman, you appeal to her imagination. That's a sort of pickup artists figured this out ages ago, right? You appeal to her imagination and you set the mood. You've got to have the music, you've got to have this, you've got to have that sort of thing. And you set up if you get the fantasy right, you'll score. End of simple as that. Sort of thing, because for them that imaginative side of things is very, very appealing. Whereas, so that's where their pornography lies, very, very much in that.
Like 50 Shades of Grey and all that phenomenon.
Exactly.
Correct.
I mean, if you look at what feminists have been saying for the past 100 years, right? And then you look at 50 Shades of Grey, it's like, how do you explain this contradiction, right? But it's exactly it, that 50 Shades of Grey type of thing. There's a certain woman they like narrative. Men are not interested in narrative. I want to see boobs, I want to see butts, I want activity, and that's it. They don't need narrative.
Right.
Right. For men are very goal oriented, right, in that sense, whereas women need the narrative is more important than the thing itself. And this is one of the big disconnects between male and female sexuality, and they obviously constantly butt heads in that regard.
Right.
If they could just understand each other properly and meet there, then they could fulfill each other a lot better, sort of thing. So yeah,
you mentioned
it's quite interesting.
Male sexuality, and this isn't even in my notes, so it's an interesting thought, but male sexuality not being narrative driven. I remember seeing a documentary on the pornographic industry, and obviously every pornographic film has to be reviewed for a regulatory purpose. It has to receive a ranking. So that means someone has to watch it in entirety. Yes. And there's no narrative to these things whatsoever. So someone's job is simply clock in at 8 and just watch pornography until 5 p.m. with no narrative structure.
No.
What dreadful, like, you would go insane. You cannot do this type of thing. And how would you interview for such a position? But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you most people when they're mocking pornography, right, they talk about, oh, here comes the pool cleaner, or your mailman. And so that very tiny little bit of narrative, that's only there as a pretext for whatever is just about, for what's going to now happen on the kitchen counter. So but what a lot of people don't realize is the vast majority of pornography that men consume, there's no narrative. It's literally girl on the screen starts taking off her clothes and starts doing whatever she's doing. The narrative is just dispensed with, sort of thing, right? And a lot of the time you don't even have to see her face. You don't have to see. It's just she's objectified to nothing but the sum of her parts. That's it. And this is the essence of the essence of pornography and hookup culture, right? the human being ceases to be a human being and becomes a masturbatory object.
Correct.
So in female pornography or in hookup culture, the male is, you're a dildo. That's all you are.
Yeah.
You know, and I'd like all of you young men out there to understand this. When you're going out and hooking up with these women, you are nothing but a dildo. So bear that in mind, and hopefully that makes you think twice. And it's the same thing, you know, for you know, the one the sheer hypocrisy of the modern culture wars, where especially feminism talks about all of this, oh, how terrible it is for women to be objectified. Women are objectified more today than they have ever been in the history of mankind.
Oh, correct.
Because once upon a time, woman had a goddess-like essence, right? Because if you look at the pantheons, you had female goddesses, and they embodied various virtues, whether it was Aphrodite, whether it was the Hera, or whoever it was, the goddess of the hunt, the goddess of this, the goddess of that. Women were more than just sex. Right.
Correct.
Yes, there was the Aphrodite, but there was also the mother of the goddess of the home, the goddess of the harvest, the goddess of the moon and the seasons, and there was all of these kinds of things. If you look at like a Greek literature, the role that females play is this rich role, right? These days, there's none of that. Men and women nowadays fulfill, in the mind of the other, fulfill only one of two roles. They are either my enemy, or they're an object for sexual gratification. That is the modern relationship between men and women. That is it. Is enemy or object for sexual gratification. That's it. There's no more relationship between men and women anymore. There's none. Men and women hate each other.
Yeah, you talked a lot about it in your video, My Story, how you fell into promiscuity. Probably the key element, the key phrase that really stuck with me in the entire video, and the video is about an hour long, was where you talked about how you said something, I'm paraphrasing, that young people haven't left the church and gone into drugs, sex, and rock and roll because they're worse as a generation. They've left the church and gone to drugs, sex, and rock and roll because they weren't given sufficient answers to their questions. And as a result, they have an emptiness, they have a meaningless in their life, in this nihilistic, materialistic worldview. And they're trying to find a sense of meaning, or they're trying to escape the pain of an arbitrary, meaningless existence with drugs, sex, and rock and roll. So you talked about how you went into the New Age movement from that sense of hopelessness, that type of existential despair, and kind of to wrap everything up, to kind of maybe move into the final segment. You found yourself as a Christian. That's where you currently have found yourself. What was it about Christianity? What was it about Jesus that solved or satisfied or was attractive to at least try to remedy some of those deep problems that you were talking about, these deep issues that you had in your life?
Okay. If you will permit, I'll give my background in this regard ever so slightly, if I may. Right. So a lot of people would have heard right in the beginning that I essentially grew up as a Christian. Right. And then because of the things that I saw going on within the Christian church, I left. Because when I looked at the behavior of Christians, and this is one of the primary objections that atheists in general have. They're like, when we look at Christians, you all are no better than we are.
Right.
So what reason do I have to? And this was one of my many problems with when I looked at my family unit, when I looked at my extended family unit, all the problems that there were, divorce in the family, all these kinds of things. When I looked at the church, the things that the people in the church were doing, abuse that was going on in the church and things like that. No one actually, despite all of this lip service to loving one another and all that, no one actually, I saw that no one actually loved each other. And I'm like, well, these morons can't have the truth. It's impossible, right? And so that's why, I became like nihilistic sort of thing. And one of the reasons that nihilism and stuff like that appealed to me, right? And this is going to influence how I answer the questions you just asked, was because of my highly sociopathic nature, right? Whereas Technically, the word sociopath is incorrect. You have primary and secondary psychopathy, right? They both fall under the umbrella of psychopathy, and both of them are actually very, very different in how they express and stuff like that. But essentially, someone who's sociopathic is very, very goal driven. The other people are not people. They're just, you are either helping me to get to where I'm going, or you're in my way. That is how people with psychopathy in general see other people, right? You're either helping me achieve what I want, or you're in my way. And if you're in my way, then I will dispense with you like I would a pen that doesn't work anymore. You are literally that meaningless, right? And it's nothing against you, because it's nothing against you as a person, right? Because you've got, if I said to you, do you have anything against a couch? You'll be like, well, that's ridiculous. The couch is meaningless. That's how the psychopath sees you. It's not personal. It cannot be personal, because you can't have anything against an object. And that's why they can dispense with you like you're an object, like you would move a couch out of your way. That's how we treat people. And so a nihilistic world was very, very good for me, because it's like, well, I don't have to worry about all of this garbage for me to get what I want. Right. And people like Sam Harris and stuff like that, they're like, oh, well, if there was no such thing as God, I'm pretty sure people would not be killing each other and raping and all that kind of stuff. Rubbish. Most people believe in God, and that stuff happens anyway. So we absolutely would. The only thing that stops people from doing that is the fact that there's a police force that's gonna cart me off. There's deterrence. The reason why it happens anyway is because psychopaths are not. Deterrence doesn't work with psychopaths, because there's something about the word that we use to describe psychopaths. It's called contumaciousness. They've got a problem with authority. You cannot threaten a psychopath. They don't care, which is why they do it anyway, right? It makes no difference. Deterrents work for narcissists. They work for borderlines. They work for everyone else. It doesn't work for a psychopath. The psychopath could care less. He really doesn't care, right? The only person that does not care is the psychopath, right? All of these other people on social media, oh, I don't care about this and that. Lie. A lie. There's only one person that genuinely does not care, is the psychopath. No one else, right? So that aside, so I left the church, right? I left the church. Now, and I want to get what I want, and I hated Christians, man. Christians became, I was exactly what most internet troll atheists are like.
Right.
I was that guy, okay? Total moron, right? Total idiot. Thought I knew what I was talking about. Had no idea what I was talking about. All of it was just an excuse for me to do whatever the hell I wanted. And I noticed in me over time, the thing at the back of my mind was always these things that happened to my sister, that spiritualistic stuff that happened to my sister. And all that kind of stuff. That was always, how do I explain these things? Because one thing I couldn't get away from was the fact that certain weird things happen in life, okay? I was never one of those atheists that just materialism and everything's explained by materialism. I was like, I'm sorry, there are some things out there that cannot be explained by materialism, because I had personally experienced them with a spiritualist background. Some of the things I'd seen, I'm like, this stuff is, I don't know. I would just, with those things, I was just like, I would just file it away under who the hell knows. Right. That's what I did with that, right? But over time, being as angry as I was, and I used all of the anger with God, because one of the things, remember I said psychopathy, but these are all post-traumatic disorders, right? They've been hurt, they've been damaged, and now they're angry with the world, in a sense. They're taking revenge on the world for the things that they went through, right? And this is the substance of most people's arguments against God. God, if you're really there, what the hell? Yeah. This is the basis of our argument. And I caught onto this eventually one day, where I was like, how can I be angry? Because doesn't being angry with this mean that this thing is genuinely wrong?
Right.
And how can it be genuinely wrong if there is no real right and wrong? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I started to realize that I was tripping over my own feet here, that I was not philosophically consistent at all, right? So I started going over to spiritualism and things like that. And I got to the point where it's like, right, I'm going to settle once and for all this question. Is there a God or isn't there? And if there is, who the hell is he? Right? What's going on? I've had enough. I'm going to figure this out. And so I went into the New Age. I went into Buddhism. I did martial arts. I did Shaolin Kung Fu. Was great. Loved it. I studied shiatsu massage therapy. It's a pressure point therapy. And one of the most interesting things I studied was something called quantum touch, right? Some of your friends who maybe are more on the esoteric side of things might be familiar with this. It was very popular in South Africa back in the day. I don't know if it was popular anywhere else in the world. Basically what happens, it was an art of channeling. And because I had the martial arts background, I was already sort of predisposed to that sort of thing. And so I actually did very well, where basically you channel energy. You do like a kind of a breathing exercise and a ritual and whatever. You channel energy into a person's body in order to achieve some sort of healing. And I got to the point where, let's say if a person had a dislocated bone or whatever the case might be, if I channeled into that body part, the parts would move back into position on their own and they would be fine, sort of thing. So I would realign people's skeletal system, their spines, all of these kinds of things. In fact, I've actually got a friend, I'm still friends with him today, who was in the church. He had some sort of a back problem when he was like in his early teens or whatever. And I went on some church retreat because my family dragged me along or something like that. At this point, I was an atheist. I was a spiritualist at this point. And I was propagandizing all of the other Christian kids. And I think this is why Satan gives you these powers, right? Because I'm like, well, I can fix your back for you. And he's like, really? I'm like, yes. So I sat him down. I put and during the channeling process, you actually generate a lot of heat. So he felt like, wow, that's getting really hot. And he started feeling. And then once I'd done, I said, well, get up and move around and see. And he's like, I can't believe it. I'm actually healed.
Wow.
You know, it's like, wow, sort of thing. So that's why I began believing in this stuff, right? Because I'm like, well, you can't deny the results. Okay. And the fact of the matter is, most people, they'll look at me and like, dude, you're talking crap. This can't possibly happen.
Right.
It's the kind of thing that unless you see it happen in front of you, people are not going to believe it. Simple as that. I mean, I wouldn't have, if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't believe it myself, you know. But although people in third world countries will believe it much easier, because people in third world countries see this kind of stuff happen all the time, right? This is one of the things. Modern civilization, modern society has actually shielded us from seeing spiritual things quite a lot. It's actually quite incredible how much is shielded. But if you go out into and you get the stories from people, what happens is the intellectual West likes to dismiss the stories because it's a bigotry, right? Oh, these people are too backwards and too third world and too stupid to really understand what's going on. And I'm sorry, if someone grows horns, there's no two ways about it. Matey, grow horns. What do you want? Yeah. There was so just to relate a story in this one village in South Africa, right? So I think some cows or some goats were stolen. And so they went to the witch doctor who did a thing, right? The culprit, there's gonna be a sign, and the culprit is, you're gonna know who the culprit is. Matey grew horns. You know, he's the one that stole the goat. He's got the horn. This is what's happening out there in the world. And people are like, no, this is nonsense. It can't be true. It happens. So yeah, anyway, I digress. So, but now the problem is, I am more slanted. If you look at my personality profile, I'm more slanted towards the cerebral type. So even though I was very sociopathic and stuff like that, and I did sleep around a little bit, but not much. For someone, you know, I was more cerebral, and there is a big distinction between a sort of a cerebral sort of narcissist or cerebral sort of person versus someone who's a bit more what they call somatic, who's more in the body, very, very promiscuous and all these kinds of things. And I was, generally speaking, I was more interested in having relationships than I was in just fooling around, sort of thing. I mean, I maybe had maybe 1 or 2 one-night stands in my whole entire life. The rest were, I was promiscuous, but with my girlfriends, kind of thing, you know, sort of thing, premarital sort of stuff, you know, sort of. When you find a girl who's as damaged as you are, then off you go, sky's the limit, really. You know? I lost my train of thought.
Well, but obviously there's a lot of brokenness, and the thing that I immediately picked on in your story, for that on, is at a micro and a macro level. Because we also talked, we didn't really talk about this in our conversation, but in that video, story, there's a lot of issues going on with your family. So you are moving around into different continents, an incredible amount of instability. There's political strife at a macro level. You know, what's going to happen? There's lots of tension. There's this looming threat of disaster, but also experience at the micro level in the family. So it's society where you're moving, but it's also your family. You talked a little bit about maybe some abuse that was going on there. So there, I can imagine what I was able to glean from it, this sense of ever-present anxiety that like everything's about to rip in half. There's lots of moving around. Taking that into consideration with the identity issues of, you know, what am I? Brazilian? Am I South African? There's a lot going on there. And you found yourself now as a Christian. What is it about Christ that was able to assist you? Because you tried things, you went out. All right. What was it about Christ that was able to address these issues you did not find, whether it was atheism or whether it was spiritualism? What's the determining factor there?
Yeah, I must disappoint Christian audiences, because the answer to that is nothing. The reason the reason I came to Christianity, you need to remember, I'm an emotionally damaged individual.
Sure.
Right. So I've only ever truly loved one person. It's the only person I remember ever. The only person I remember ever loving in any sense of the word is my wife now. It's which surprised the hell out of me. She made me feel in ways that I didn't think there's something that was ever going to happen to me, sort of thing. So the reason I came to Christianity was because it made sense, and because the other world philosophies made no sense. They're incoherent. They're completely incoherent. Christianity does nothing for me emotionally at all. It doesn't give me a sense of. So, for example, the fact that I'm Brazilian. The fact that I'm from a mixed race background, the fact that to me, these things are meaningless. I don't care that I'm Brazilian, right? This is one of the reasons why identity politics to me is so idiotic, because the fact that you are something that was beyond your control, who cares? It's like me being proud of the fact that I've got brown hair. It's a completely idiotic thing to be proud of. It's like, you had no control in doing that. If I'm going to be proud of something, I'm going to base my identity around the things that actually come from the fruit of my labor or my thoughts, not something that was a complete accident of my genetic heritage. Why am I going to, so this is one of the things. And from what I've seen, even in my family, because the identitarian thing did happen in my family a lot. So, for example, my family, we rejected, just so that people are aware. It's not like my parents were like horribly abusive people or anything like that. Let me they're not evil people, right? Sure. We're all just very damaged people, sort of thing. Because my mother went through a lot of poverty. My mother was abused by her parents. My father went through the Civil War, and he lost his mother to cancer when he was a child. These things damage you, and when you're damaged like that, you don't really know how to love properly. You can't be emotionally salient. So these things, it's not like anything they did. It wasn't that kind of abuse where it's like I'm being molested every day. Kind of, it's not, just so that people are aware, so that my parents don't get like a bad name or anything like that. I just want to clarify that sort of thing, because a lot of people can be like, oh, dude, you're bad mouthing their parents and stuff like that. It's like no, whilst there was definitely some really idiotic things, it's not like they're evil people or anything like that. It's the result of people being damaged. and making those kinds of mistakes and stuff like. And these days, there's been a lot of reconciliation. I get along with my parents and stuff like that. We've worked through these things. So just so that is said. Now, with coming into Christianity, yeah, it's not for me. My identity as a Christian, again, it's completely irrelevant. It's one of the reasons that I can be critical internally, and like I'm an Adventist, and if I see another Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist being stupid, I'll tell them. I said, "You're being a moron," right? Because the fact that they're a Seventh-day Adventist,
it's true. I've seen it, Ghost. I've seen it happen.
Yeah, the fact that they're a Seventh-day Adventist means nothing. I say you're either following the truth or you're not, right? And one of the things that I came to respect about the Bible is that it says God is not a respecter of persons. He doesn't care if you're Jewish, if you're black, if you're white, or he's like really equal opportunity. And this identitarian stuff has got no emotional salience. The reason why I tell these things, divulge these things, is because other people find it interesting.
Right.
And unfortunately, the fact that I am these things is very helpful, because some people are so bigoted and narrow-minded that unless they know that I'm mixed race, they wouldn't listen to me otherwise. You know what I'm saying? So that's the only reason. It's a tactic. That's the only reason I tell people these things, right? But as if I had it my way, I wouldn't care. It's meaningless.
So for you, like you mentioned, that's interesting, because at this point in the presentation where someone is giving their traditional conversion story, there's a moment of incredible emotion, and the music comes up. But for you, and I think what a lot of people will resonate with you, is that for you, it wasn't an emotional thing. It's that this is the truth. This is a rational way of observing reality and existing as a person. This is an accurate reflection of the transcendent real world.
Yes.
I think that's a different take, and a necessary take. Because a lot of people think like, well, you're a Christian because the preacher manipulated you emotionally, but for you, it was the result of thought. What were some of the arguments? You talked a little bit one about morality, but what were some of the most impressive arguments that made you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, well, the argument was the very, very first one. My conversion experience, right, was a moment where I realized I was being a moron. And I'll tell you exactly how it happened. Do you know a band called Linkin Park?
Yeah, sure.
Right. One of my favorite bands when I was growing up as a teenager. Loved Linkin Park, right? Had all of their albums, great stuff. So there was a song that they released, right? Where the lyrics go, he says, I dreamed I was missing and you were so scared, but no one would listen because no one else cared. But after my dreaming, I woke with this fear. What am I leaving when I'm done here? Right? And I found myself in that moment thinking, you idiot. This has got emotional salience to you, that what legacy am I leaving behind? If I die today, is the world better without me? Is the world a better place because of my death? Or is it a better place because of my existence? And the answer, frankly, at that point was it would be better off without me. And this was a profound, and I realized, and I'm saying the only reason that I can make this distinction between better off and have a moral thing, it suddenly dawned on me that there was genuinely a right and a wrong, and I was being a complete idiot. And I was like, well, I gotta resolve this. And this is when I went through all the things, and it was philosophical arguments, right? So one of the things that brings you to Christianity, what a lot of people realize is that in other religions, right, the objective right and wrong does not actually exist in those religions. They're very, very relativistic, right? Very, very relativistic sort of thing. Whereas Christianity is not. In other religions, people try to run away from hardship. And so, for example, the whole thing these days that's very popular is Buddhism, where they talk about, and the old Buddhist dictum that life is suffering, and this is so wonderful. And Jordan Peterson goes on about it all the time and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, true, they conclude that life is suffering, but then their solution to that is like, well, cease to exist, become nothing, become one with the universe, and cease to be an individual, essentially speaking, right? It's like, that's no solution. It's basically right? The solution to suffering is stop existing, run away. What a lot of people don't realize is cease to exist. That's literally what the psychopath and the narcissist is doing. Because you are not existing. You are running away, right? You kill parts of yourself off, right? The emotions. So one of the most profound, one of the emotions I remember experiencing the most growing up, more than anything else, was disappointment, right? Disappointment just all the time, right? At everything, all the time, right? And so it's like, well, if I don't feel anything, if I kill off my emotions, I'll never be disappointed again.
Right.
So you stop, and that's literally what psychopaths and narcissists and this personality, it's people killing off parts of themselves so that so the less I exist, the less the world can hurt me. That's literally what we're doing, right? So in essence, that is the philosophy of paganism. Christianity doesn't do that. Christianity says, turn around and set your face against evil. You turn around and you bloody well face it, and you make a change and you make a difference. And I'm like, well, this is this is the way. As you know, if those who watch The Mandalorian, it is the way. Right? This is the only this makes sense, right? This is, you get it, you don't engage in magical thinking and stuff. And this is, a lot of atheists are probably thinking, by magical thinking, you believe in a sky daddy, right? It doesn't get more magical thinking than that sort of thing. But I mean, the fact that you believe that morality exists undergirded by nothing, I mean, that's quintessential magical thinking, right? That's delusion of the highest order, right? This sort of thing. It's there can only be objective morals and values and duties and right and wrong and all these kinds of things if they have a foundation in something. And the only possible, then this is where you've got to get philosophical. The only available grounding for that is if there is a prescriber of morals, if there is a lawgiver. That is the only thing that explains it. It's the only way that's possible. And it pissed me off that in order for me to live life consistently, right? Because I can live life inconsistently. I can believe in moral values and duties and reject the existence of a deity. That would mean that I was living my life inconsistently. I might be moral, but living a moral life is inconsistent with my atheism and my disbelief. The only way that I could live consistently was to become a Christian if I wanted morality, if I wanted right and wrong. And this bothered me. Yeah, and this bothered me. The fact that I had to become a Christian in order to live life consistently pissed me off no end. I can't even tell you. It was like C.S. Lewis. He says, was the most dejected convert in all England. I disagree. Well, I was the most dejected convert in all of South Africa. It was very, very, very annoying, because then I was forced to realize that even if every single Christian on the planet was a complete moron, completely degenerate, it is irrelevant to the question of whether God does or does not in fact exist.
Right. Well,
and I had to accept this.
The last question here. So this happened, and that's a key thing, to have a cerebral understanding, like knowing that this is truth and this, an accurate understanding of reality. You were able to avoid some of the homonyms. Well, Christianity cannot be correct because my youth pastor was an idiot, or something to that effect.
Exactly.
It's completely irrelevant to truth.
Christianity is true even if your youth pastor is a moron, and unfortunately that's the case more often than not.
Right. There are experiential claims, perhaps, in Scripture of fruits of the Spirit and that type of thing. So post conversion, post Christianity, maybe there wasn't an emotional change. Was there any change in your
Oh,
life?
yeah.
Was there any difference after the fact? You can speak to that a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I started to live accordingly. In other words, I realized that if certain moral values and duties are correct, it means I need to start treating human beings as if they have intrinsic moral value. Start seeing them as human entities, as ends in themselves, rather than obstacles, rather than objects. It means I had to start putting value on things that before I did not value. I had to start respecting people more. There were certain behaviors that I had to stop engaging in, because for me to destroy myself and others is objectively wrong. And so my life had to change in terms of sorting out my emotional status, right? Getting to grips with the fact that I was a total idiot. Getting to grips with the fact that I was a total psycho, getting to grips with and the fact that sleeping around is wrong, that I'm injuring not only myself, but I'm injuring her, whether she consents to it or not. And this is one of the things that people talk about, right? The secular world, oh, as long as it's two adults who are consenting. The only thing you are doing is consenting to self-harm. You are never consent. Sex outside of marriage might be consensual, but all it means is you are consenting to harm yourself. That's all. And I had to acknowledge these things. There's certain things that will lead to a better world, certain things that will not. As simple as that, right? And then it became apparent to me that the reason why, and once you understand that, it becomes like, well, duh. It became apparent to me that everyone's like, oh, well, the world is so miserable. And if God exists, why is the world so miserable? It's like, well, duh, you do everything wrong all the time. Of course. What else do you expect?
It's always someone else's fault, right?
Yeah, it's like I stick my hand in the fire and now I'm going to get upset with thermodynamics because I got burned. That's literally how idiotic the argument is. And once it dawned on me, I was like, well, wow, I was such a moron. It's like, well, obviously the world is a total dung heap. It's because we turned it into that, right? And here's the thing, right? You either want free will or you don't. It's that simple. You want free will, then guess what? Your actions have consequences. If you do good things will follow. If you're an idiot, well, as they say, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And this is exactly what human society is constantly doing. They play stupid games, they reap stupid prizes. It's that simple, right? The past 2 years with the whole coronavirus is a perfect example of that. The intellectual, the scientific world, right, released a deadly virus onto the world stage, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And now the world is in an absolute state of chaos because some idiots in a laboratory somewhere did things that they shouldn't have. And because the US government funded stuff they shouldn't have. And so now everyone is in an absolute state of misery. The world is divided, first of all, right? Forget about everything, right? It's if you trace everything back to the source, a group of scientists, a group of arrogant, narcissistic scientists decided we're going to screw around with the virus. Consequences be damned. The virus escaped, and now today, I don't care whether you are pro-vax, I don't care whether you are anti-vax, I don't care what the hell you believe about anything. The fact of the matter is that the end consequence of a couple of idiots playing around with the virus in the lab means that the world today is suffering economic chaos. We've added 100 million people to the poverty line, at least. People are killing themselves in despair. People are losing their jobs. The world is divided. The church is divided. Why? Because a small handful of people decided that they will screw around with the virus. Literally, that's what the past 2 years have been. And I realized all of a sudden that this is why God in the Bible worries about small things, because one of the atheist objections is, oh, why is God so concerned about what I do in the bedroom? It's because small things ruin the world, you idiot. That's why. That's why God worries about what happens in the bedroom. Because if people worried the way they were supposed to about what happens in the bedroom, there would have been no such thing as a Me Too movement. There would have been no such thing as Epstein. if people were more concerned about what people are doing in their bedrooms. There would be no Epstein. There would be no Me Too. There would be no need for there would be need of none of this if we were all doing what we were supposed to do, instead of behaving like a bunch of degenerate morons, thinking that I can screw around and I can get away with it. You can't. And that's when I woke up. I was like, well, I've got to accept Christianity because that's how it is. Yeah.
Well, now we went on YouTube. Now we're coming on 2 hours. And like I said at the beginning of the broadcast, I knew this was going to happen because there were a lot of different things that I wanted to talk about. I almost feel too like we barely scratched the surface in all these topics. We could even go into things a little bit more. So if people are, I know people are, when they're listening to this, they're hearing talking on all topics. You've obviously got some things to say, and they want to know more. They want to follow up and watch some good stuff. What's the best way for them to follow up? What's the best way for them to kind of learn, maybe interact with you more and get exposed to some more of your content?
Right. So depending on what you want to do. So if you just want my videos and my videos only, YouTube is the best place for that. So all my videos on there. I have put some videos on BitChute for those who use BitChute, but because BitChute is so unreliable, I almost never use it anymore because it's so unreliable. But I do have some videos up there. If you want to talk to me, by all means, email me, message me, or go onto Facebook, because Facebook lends itself to conversation and all of that kind of stuff. I just warn everyone right now that I am a zero tolerance sort of how can I say, administrator. If I get the whiff that you're being an idiot, I'm going to ban you from the Facebook page. So unless you honestly want to have a legitimate conversation, don't bother. Don't waste my time. Don't waste your time. You're just going to get yourself banned. But if you have honest answers, and I don't care who you are, and I don't care if you disagree with me, you are more than welcome to disagree with me, right? Freedom of conscience. Yeah. Disagree with me. All I care is that you are legit and you legitimately want to just chat. You want to know, you want to discuss things. Cool. Facebook, if you want to chat, private message if you want to chat. Some of my videos are on Facebook. Otherwise, YouTube is the place to go for the videos. And feel free to request videos. If you have any topic that you want me to talk about, go ahead. I'll viewers' questions and stuff like that. I do that sort of thing. I haven't posted, by the way, I haven't posted a video for quite some time. Just for those, if they look at my channel, like, oh, he hasn't posted in 6 months. It's partially because of the cancer and partially because I moved house in the meantime. So it's been chaotic. It's been chaotic for me. I've needed to, especially the medication with the cancer. It sort of messed with the head, and I had to come right before I can come on. Otherwise, I'm just gonna cause problems, sort of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, well, there you have it. So this is some Christian guy. Thanks for coming on, man. This was a really interesting discussion, even for me personally, because I've watched these videos while it's been outside in the past year. So I've personally been able to just maybe get a little bit more of some of the questions I had from the My Story video and other things like that. So guys, check out Some Christian Guy on the YouTube channel. You got the Facebook page link right there. And like you said, yeah, just feel free to, hit him up if you have any questions. We're not launching a website or anything. You may notice the logo on the bottom of the screen. We do have a website, seekinginscripture.com, and we're also going to put this video up on our YouTube page and our website. It hasn't fully launched yet. This is more of just something I want to do for personal reasons. So, but if you are curious, go to seekinginscripture.com where you can see this and some other videos. But that doesn't really launch until May. But definitely check out this guy's YouTube channel. There's a lot of interesting things on a lot of various topics. And yeah, until next time, thanks so much for coming on, man. I enjoyed it.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, mate. It's a privilege.
Okay. Hey, guys, have a good one. We'll see you later.